I'm Leo, I'm 29, and my own father sent me a 10-word text message that blew up my entire life. Before I tell you how that single text led to eviction notices, a shocking discovery on Airbnb, and a dramatic showdown in a church full of people, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. It all started on a Tuesday, a completely unremarkable, boring Tuesday. I was standing in my small apartment, folding a mountain of clean laundry, listening to some podcast about astrophysics, just trying to decompress after a long day at my software engineering job. 10 words. That's all it took to attempt to erase 29 years of existence. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. They didn't seem real. Felt like a line from a bad movie. My heart did this weird, painful lurch in my chest, a physical pang of shock. Cut off? Just like that? There hadn't been an argument. The sky outside my window was that hazy, polluted orange of a city sunset. My phone, which had been silent for hours, buzzed on the kitchen counter. I figured it was my buddy Sam, probably sending me another ridiculous meme about cats. I finished folding a t-shirt with methodical precision, walked over, and picked it up, a small smile already on my face. The smile vanished the second I saw the screen. It wasn't Sam. It was a group chat titled Family. The participants were my dad, Richard, my mom, Brenda, and my younger brother, Ethan. The new message was from my dad. It was short, brutal, and utterly devoid of context or emotion. Don't call us. Don't visit. You're cut off. Hadn't spoken in 3 days. No explanation, no lead-up, nothing. Just a digital guillotine, swift and silent. Before my brain could even begin to formulate a response, another notification popped up in the same chat. My brother, Ethan, had liked the message. A little blue thumbs-up icon appeared right next to Dad's cruel decree. It was so casual, so dismissive. It was like a digital seal of approval, a little cheer from the sidelines. And that, more than the message itself, was what shattered the numbness and let the pain rush in. It was the confirmation. This wasn't just my dad having a momentary lapse in sanity. This was a coordinated family decision. They had talked about this. They had all agreed. I was out. My hands started to shake, a tremor that began in my fingers and worked its way up my arms. It wasn't from sadness, not yet. It was from a sudden volcanic surge of cold fury. All the years of biting my tongue, of sending a huge chunk of my salary home every month, of putting their needs, their wants, their comfort before my own. For this, to be discarded like a piece of trash with a text message and a thumbs up? I thought about all the things I could say. I could beg. I could demand an explanation. I could fire back with 100 angry, wounded questions. But then, a strange, chilling sense of clarity washed over me. It was like a light switch flipped in a dark room, illuminating a single, simple path forward. They had cut the rope. All I had to do was let go. My thumbs moved over the keyboard. The shaking stopped. I was perfectly calm. I typed out my reply, my own 10-word declaration of independence. Perfect. I'll cancel the auto payments first thing tomorrow. I hit send. For a moment, there was a beautiful, profound silence. Then, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree in a lightning storm. The screen flashed with an incoming call from Mom. I watched the screen, my thumb hovering over the decline button. I pressed it. Immediately, a call from Dad came through. I declined it. A text from Ethan. A string of frantic question marks followed by, "What the hell, Leo?" Then another call. And another. The quiet peace of my apartment was shattered by a relentless, panicked buzzing. A digital symphony of their disbelief. But I didn't answer. I just stood there watching it happen, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt a sliver of control. The storm had just begun, and they had no idea the hurricane they had just unleashed. To understand why my 10-word reply caused a nuclear meltdown, you have to understand that for the last 7 years, my role in the family wasn't son or brother. It was the financial plan. It was the living, breathing solution to all of their problems. It started subtly, insidiously, right after I graduated from college with my engineering degree and landed my first real job. I was so proud. I was the first person in our immediate family to get a 4-year degree, and I had a salary that seemed astronomical to me at the time. My parents were proud, too, but their pride had a practical edge. My dad, who was only in his early 50s, suddenly started complaining of burnout. He was tired of the grind, he said, and decided to take an early retirement. My mom, a part-time administrator, followed suit about 6 months later. They didn't have a huge nest egg or a solid retirement plan. They had me. "You're doing so well, Leo," my mom, Brenda, would say, her voice dripping with that sweet, manipulative honey I knew so well. She'd pat my arm, her eyes wide with sincerity. "It's a son's duty to look after his parents. That's how we were raised. It's the right thing to do." And I believed her. First, it was small things. "Could you cover the electricity bill this month, honey? We're a little tight." Of course, I said yes. How could I not? Then it was the internet bill because my dad needed it for his research, which mostly consisted of watching fishing videos on YouTube. Then it was groceries because prices are just so high these days. Soon, I was on a first-name basis with the customer service reps at their utility companies. I set up automatic payments from my checking account just to make it easier on everyone. It was simpler than having the same awkward, guilt-inducing conversation every single month. In my mind, I was just helping out. In their minds, I had just assumed my rightful position. But it didn't stop there. The small leaks became a flood. About a year into their retirement, my dad called me in a panic. "The property taxes are due, son. I don't know how we're going to manage." The unspoken threat was always there, hanging in the air between us. "If you don't pay, we'll lose the house." The house I grew up in. The one with the pencil marks on the doorframe tracking my height. So I paid them. Every single year. I would write a 5-figure check that felt like a punch to the gut. A check that could have been a down payment on my own place, an investment in my own future. Instead, it was the annual fee for maintaining their comfort. I remember one specific incident that should have been a wake-up call. I had finally saved up enough to replace my beat-up, 10-year-old car. It was on its last legs, making noises that even my mechanic couldn't identify. I'd spent weeks researching. I'd found the perfect, reliable used sedan. I was going to go to the dealership that Saturday. On Friday evening, I got a call from my mom. She was crying. "Leo, it's the roof," she wailed. "The storm last night. There's a huge leak in the living room. We have buckets everywhere. The repairman said it's going to be thousands of dollars to fix, and our insurance deductible is so high. I don't know what we're going to do." I closed my eyes. I could picture myself driving the new car, not having to pray every time I turned the key in the ignition. The feeling of safety, of reliability. Then I pictured my parents, huddled under a leaky roof. The guilt was a physical weight, a crushing pressure on my chest. "I'll handle it, Mom," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. I transferred the money I had so carefully saved. My car fund. The dealership sold the sedan to someone else the next day. I drove my old clunker for another 2 years, pouring money into repairs just to keep it running. My parents got a brand new roof. They sent me a thank you card. Inside, my mom had written, "You're our hero." It felt less like a compliment and more like a job title. And then there was Ethan. My brother, 2 years younger than me, was the golden child. While I was building my career, he was finding himself, which apparently involved a lot of part-time jobs he'd quit after a few weeks and developing expensive hobbies. He lived at home, rent-free, of course, a permanent resident of the hotel of Mom and Dad, funded by the Bank of Leo. When I started making good money, my parents sat me down for a family meeting. "Ethan is trying so hard, Leo," Dad said, with a serious, concerned look on his face. "But it's tough out there for young people. We were thinking, just to help him get on his feet, you could send him a little something each month." A little something turned into $300 a month, auto-deposited into his account on the 1st of every month. I once saw him post a picture on Instagram of a brand new $400 pair of sneakers the day after my payment went through. The caption was #grinding. I almost threw my phone against the wall. My salary wasn't just supporting my parents. It was funding my brother's delusion that he was a self-made man. And the only person who seemed to see the absurdity of it all was my grandfather, Arthur Pierce. The financial drain was one thing, a slow, steady bleeding that I had learned to live with. But the emotional injustice of it all, that was the salt in the wound. And the architect of that injustice, the living embodiment of the family's double standards, was my brother, Ethan. He wasn't just my parents' favorite. He was their masterpiece. I was the sturdy, reliable draft horse, pulling the family cart without complaint. He was the prized show pony, praised for his beauty while contributing nothing but noise. Our entire childhood was a case study in this disparity. I remember my 16th birthday vividly. I had been saving for months from my part-time job bagging groceries to buy a used car. I'd spent weeks researching, looking at listings, learning about engines and transmissions. My parents gave me a card with $100 in it and a long lecture about the importance of being responsible with my own money. I was grateful, truly. But 2 years later, on Ethan's 16th birthday, they rolled out the red carpet. They co-signed a loan for a brand new car for him. A shiny, red sports coupe. It was completely impractical and the insurance was a nightmare, but it looked cool. He's got such a vibrant personality. Leo, my mom explained, seeing the flicker of hurt on my face. He needs a car that matches his spirit. You've always been more practical. Practical was their code word for boring and responsible, so we don't have to worry about him. It was my label, the box they put me in so they could focus all their energy and resources on Ethan. When I got a B in calculus, I was grounded for a month and told I was jeopardizing my entire future and the chance of a good college fund. When Ethan failed 2 classes in 1 semester, my parents hired him an expensive private tutor, which, you guessed it, I was later asked to help pay for. He's a creative type, Dad would say with a dismissive shrug. The traditional school system stifles him. It can't contain his energy. This dynamic only became more pronounced as we got older. A perfect example was the day I moved into my first apartment. It was a huge milestone for me. I had asked my dad and Ethan if they could help me move some of the heavy furniture. It was a Saturday. Oh, we'd love to, Leo, my dad said. But we promised to help Ethan set up his new gaming system. It's a whole big thing, you know, with the wiring and all. So I moved a sofa, a mattress, and a desk up 3 flights of stairs by myself, with the help of one friend, Sam. Later that night, I saw a picture on my mom's Facebook page. It was a photo of Ethan and my dad, grinning, in front of a massive new TV, controllers in hand. The caption read, "Nothing more important than family time. So proud of my boys." It felt like a deliberate slap in the face. The absolute worst, the incident that truly defined our relationship, was what happened with my grandfather's Christmas money. Every Christmas, Grandpa Arthur would give each of us a check for $1,000. He was a man of tradition and fairness. One year, about a month after Christmas, I got a call from a frantic Ethan. He'd gotten himself into some trouble with credit card debt, chasing some get-rich-quick crypto scheme. He was thousands of dollars in the hole and was terrified to tell Mom and Dad. "They'll kill me, Leo. You know how they are about money," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "They'll kick me out." I knew exactly how they were about money. Their money? Anyway, mine was a different story. Against my better judgment, I paid off his debt. It wiped out my entire emergency fund, money I had painstakingly saved. I told him, my voice as stern as I could make it, that this was a one-time thing. He had to learn to be responsible. He promised he would. He swore it up and down. 2 weeks later, we were all at a family dinner. My mom was practically glowing as she showed off a new, delicate gold necklace. "Isn't it beautiful?" she gushed. "Ethan is just the sweetest boy. He used his Christmas money from your grandfather to buy it for me. He's so thoughtful." I looked at Ethan across the table. He was soaking in the praise, beaming like he'd just won the Nobel Prize. He caught my eye and gave me a little smirk, a silent, arrogant, "What are you going to do about it?" I felt sick to my stomach. He had taken my bailout money, lied to our parents, and used their ignorance to paint himself as the thoughtful, generous son. and I couldn't say a word without blowing the whole thing up and looking like the jealous, petty brother who was trying to ruin his moment. So I stayed silent. I always stayed silent. And that silence, that constant swallowing of injustice, was the fuel that had been building up inside me for years. It was a toxic, slow-burning rage. Ethan's little thumbs up on my dad's text message wasn't just an insult. It was the spark that finally lit the fuse on a decade's worth of explosive material. Now, let's rewind just a few hours before that fateful text message lit my life on fire. That Tuesday, I had lunch with my grandpa, Arthur. It was a standing appointment for us. We met at our usual spot, a quiet little diner that smelled of coffee and bacon. The vinyl on the booth seats was cracked, and the waitress, a woman named Flo, knew our orders by heart. Grandpa Arthur is a man of few words, but every word he says is load-bearing, carries weight. While my dad was all bluster and emotion, my grandpa was logic and reason, a human spreadsheet. He looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup, his eyes sharp and perceptive. He didn't miss much. "You look tired, Leo," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I tried to brush it off with a weak smile. "Just been busy at work. Big project launching soon. You know how it is." He just took another slow sip of coffee, letting the silence hang in the air between us. He knew I was lying. He was the only one I couldn't fool. Finally, I sighed, the fight going out of me. The facade crumbled. "It's just a lot," I admitted, stirring my own untouched coffee, watching the cream swirl into the black. "The house, Ethan, all of it. It feels like it's never going to end. It's like I'm a machine, and they just keep taking parts from me to keep their own lives running." "They're comfortable," he said simply, his voice flat. "You've made them comfortable. People don't willingly give up comfort. It's not in their nature." I finally let it all out. I told him about the new roof and my old car. I told him about the constant, gnawing feeling that I was running on a treadmill, working harder and harder just to keep them in the lifestyle they had chosen. I confessed the deep-seated fear that if I ever stopped, if I ever said no, their love for me, conditional as it was, would evaporate completely. He listened patiently, his gaze never leaving my face, nodding occasionally. When I was done, a rant that had left me breathless and hollow, he put his cup down with a soft, deliberate click. "Let me tell you something my father told me," he said, his voice low and steady. "Being family does not exempt anyone from responsibility. It's supposed to be a shield, Leo, not a sword. Your father is using it as a sword to take what he wants. And you're letting him." He leaned forward slightly, the diner's noise fading into the background. "You're a good man. You have a good heart. But kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. You are setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. What happens when you're nothing but ash?" His words hit me harder than any lecture or argument ever could. Kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. It echoed in my head. He wasn't telling me what to do. He was just holding up a mirror, forcing me to see the stark, ugly reality of the situation, not the guilt-ridden, duty-bound version my parents had so carefully painted for me. "What do I do, Grandpa?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You decide what you're worth," he said, signaling to Flo for the check. "And then you act accordingly." As we left the diner, he put a heavy hand on my shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. "Just know you're not alone in this," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "Remember that." I didn't know it at the time, but that conversation was the bedrock I would need to stand on just a few hours later. It was the permission I had been waiting for, the permission I needed to finally choose myself. His words were ringing in my ears when I typed out my reply to my father. He had told me to decide what I was worth, and I had decided I was worth more than a 10-word dismissal. The night after the text was a sleepless blur of angry vibrations from my phone. By morning, I had 19 missed calls and a flood of texts that ranged from my mom's tearful accusations of me being heartless and cruel to my dad's late-night, all-caps message. What kind of son abandons his family? I read them all, a cold knot tightening in my stomach, and then I put the phone on silent. My first call was to the one person I knew I could trust. "I need to see you," I said, The moment Grandpa Arthur picked up. "I know," he replied, his voice calm. "My office. 10 o'clock. His home office was my sanctuary of logic. It was filled with oak shelves, leather-bound books on finance and history, and the quiet hum of a computer. It smelled of old paper and wisdom. He was sitting behind his large, orderly desk, a single, thick manila folder placed squarely in the center. He gestured for me to sit down in the worn leather chair opposite him. "They've been busy," he said, a grim line to his mouth. "Your father called me at 6 this morning. He was ranting, barely coherent. Said you'd lost your mind, that you were trying to ruin them over some petty argument." "There was no argument," I said, my voice hoarse. "There was just an execution. I just did what I said I would. I logged into my bank account this morning and stopped the payments. All of them. The utilities, the tax savings transfer, Ethan's allowance. It's done." He nodded slowly, a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. "And in doing so, you pulled the single thread that's going to unravel their entire world. They're panicking because they know they have no leverage. Or rather, they think they have no leverage." He paused, tapping the folder with a single, decisive finger. "It's time you knew the full story, Leo. The part they conveniently left out." He opened the folder and slid a document across the polished surface of the desk towards me. It was thick, official-looking paper, held together with a brass brad. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Deed of Trust." I scanned the document, my eyes searching for the names, for the legal jargon I could understand. I saw my grandfather's name, Arthur Pierce, listed as the grantor. And then I saw the grantee, the owner. It wasn't my father, Richard Pierce. It was the Pierce Family Trust, dated over 15 years ago. My head snapped up, my heart pounding. "What is this?" "That is a legal entity I created after your grandmother passed," he explained calmly. "I am the sole trustee. In the eyes of the law and the state, I own that house." I was speechless. My mind was racing, recontextualizing every payment I had ever made, every worried phone call, every dollar I had sent. "But they always talked about the mortgage. They paid off the mortgage 20 years ago," he said, his voice cold as steel. "When your grandmother passed, I couldn't bear to sell the place. Your father was having some financial trouble at the time, so I let him and your mother move in. The agreement was simple, a verbal contract between a father and son. They would live there completely rent-free, but they had to maintain the property and pay all the associated costs. Taxes, insurance, upkeep. It was a matter of responsibility." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The property taxes I'd paid every year weren't to save their house from foreclosure. They were to save his house from a tax lien, a responsibility they had explicitly agreed to and then secretly offloaded onto me. They hadn't just been using me. They had been deceiving my grandfather as well. "They stopped paying the taxes about 10 years ago," he continued, his expression grim. "I covered it the first couple of times, thinking it was a temporary setback for them. Then I found out you had started your new job and suddenly they never mentioned the taxes to me again. I suspected you had taken over the burden, but I didn't want to interfere unless you came to me. It wasn't my place to override your decisions." He slid another paper out of the folder. This one was crisper, newer. "This is a legal notice of occupancy termination. My lawyer, Mr. Davies, drafted it for me yesterday. It gives them 60 days to vacate the premises." I stared at the legal jargon, the formal, impersonal words that were about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my family. Eviction. It was a harsh, ugly word. A part of me, the part that had been conditioned for nearly 3 decades to be the dutiful son, recoiled. But then I looked at my grandfather. His expression was firm, resolute. This wasn't about punishment. This was about consequences. "They won't see this as a consequence," Grandpa said, as if reading my mind. "They'll see it as an attack. They will make you the villain of this story, Leo. They will lie, they will scream, they will try to manipulate everyone around them. Be prepared for that." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "There's a hard lesson you're about to learn. They won't thank you for the years you supported them. They will only hate you for stopping. I took a deep breath, the smell of old paper filling my lungs. The fear was still there, a cold pit in my stomach, but now it was mixed with something else. A hard, sharp resolve. He was right. The war was coming. But for the first time, I wasn't fighting it alone. And I was armed with the one thing they never expected me to have. The truth. The registered letter from my grandfather's lawyer, Mr. Davies, landed on their doorstep 2 days later. The explosion was instantaneous and it was public. They didn't call me to yell this time. That would have been a private battle. They were smarter than that. They took their case to the court of public opinion. Social media, where they could control the narrative completely. My mom fired the first shot. She posted a picture of herself on Facebook, a professionally sad-looking selfie, looking wistfully out a window. It was carefully staged, all soft focus and sad lighting. The caption was a masterclass in passive-aggressive martyrdom. After decades of sacrifice for my children, my husband Richard and I are heartbroken to be told we are being thrown out of our home. We poured our lives into these walls. We never thought our golden years would be filled with such betrayal from someone we loved and trusted completely. Please pray for our family during this unimaginably painful time. The comments flooded in immediately. Oh, Brenda, I'm so sorry. Thinking of you. What happened? This is horrible. She didn't reply to any of them, of course. She just let the vague, damning accusation hang in the air, letting people's imaginations fill in the blanks. And they did. The villain, though unnamed, was clearly me. Ethan, never one to be outdone in the drama department, took a more direct, aggressive approach. He screenshotted the legal notice, carefully cropping out the part that mentioned my grandfather was the owner and trustee, and posted it on his Instagram story with loud, angry text overlaid. This is what happens when family only cares about money, he wrote. Being kicked out of our own home like garbage by my own brother. Some people have no soul. Hope you're happy counting your money. Leo. Hashtag family betrayal, hashtag heartless, hashtag disgusted. He actually tagged me in it. My phone started buzzing again, but this time it wasn't them. It was the shrapnel from their social media bomb. It was the extended family. My Aunt Carol, my mom's sister, was the first to call. Leo, what on earth is going on? She asked, her voice a frantic mixture of concern and accusation. Your mother is a complete wreck. I just saw her post. You're evicting them? From their home. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Aunt Carol, it's not my house. It never was. It's Grandpa's. They were supposed to be paying the taxes and they haven't for a decade. I'm the one who's been paying them, on top of everything else. There was a skeptical pause on the other end. Well, she said slowly, her tone shifting from concern to condescending. Even so, Leo, they're your parents. You don't just get a lawyer and throw them out on the street. That's not how a family works. You're supposed to talk things out. Your mother is devastated. She said you wouldn't even answer her calls. It was the classic guilt trip. The family card that had been used against me my entire life. It didn't matter what the facts were. It didn't matter who owned the house or who was paying the bills. The only thing that mattered was maintaining the illusion of a happy, supportive family, even if that illusion was being funded by my silent suffering and their deliberate deception. Next was my Uncle Robert, my dad's brother. His call was less emotional, more disappointed. Leo, it's your Uncle Rob. I saw what Ethan posted. Your dad called me. He's beside himself. He said you two had a small disagreement and this is how you retaliate? With lawyers? It's a low blow, kid. A really low blow. Whatever is going on, you need to man up and fix it. I tried to explain the situation to him, too. Uncle Rob, you don't know the whole story. They've been lying to everyone. All I know is your mother is crying and your father sounds like he's had the wind knocked out of him, he said gruffly. You're the one with the big shot job and the fancy salary. You can afford to be the bigger person here. And then he hung up. The worst was a voicemail from Ethan. He wasn't yelling. He was crying, but it was a different kind of crying from before. It was a performance for the ages, full of shuddering breaths and pathetic whimpers. You did this, Leo, he sobbed into the phone. You've destroyed my life. Mom and Dad are a mess. Where are we supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? I hope you're happy. I hope all your precious money keeps you warm at night because you've lost your family. Forever. It was all a carefully orchestrated play, and I was cast as the heartless millionaire villain. Scrooge McDuck gleefully counting his coins while his poor, virtuous family shivered in the cold. The truth was, I was sitting in my modest one-bedroom apartment, eating a bowl of cereal for dinner, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. They were framing this as a battle over money, but they were wrong. This was a battle for my soul, and it was getting uglier by the minute. They had drawn their lines in the sand, and they were using every weapon of emotional warfare they had in their arsenal. But they had made one critical mistake. They underestimated my grandfather, and they had no idea about the secret they were hiding in plain sight, a secret that was about to blow their entire narrative to pieces. For about a week, I felt like I was living in a foxhole, just weathering the constant barrage of judgment from the family. I muted the group chats, I screened my calls, and I tried to pour all my energy into work. I felt isolated, like the whole world was buying into the lies my family was selling so effectively. Then, on a Thursday night, as I was scrolling aimlessly through social media, trying to numb my brain, I got a message request from a name I hadn't seen in years. Mark Jensen. We'd been in the same high school chemistry class. We weren't close friends, just two guys who'd occasionally copied each other's homework and complained about the teacher. Hey Leo, random question. His message began. Do your parents still live in that big blue house on Oak Street? Just had the craziest weekend. Stayed there for a couple of nights with my girlfriend. Your mom is a fantastic host. I read the message twice, and then a third time. My blood ran cold. The words didn't compute. Stayed there? Host? It made no sense. They didn't have friends over, let alone strangers. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed back, my mind racing. Hey Mark. Yeah, they're still there. What do you mean you stayed there? Were you just visiting or something? His reply came back instantly. Nah, man. I booked it on Airbnb. My girlfriend and I wanted a little staycation. Something nicer than a hotel. It was listed under some name like Laura's Cozy Suburban Retreat. But then I saw a family photo on the mantelpiece with you in it, and I was like, wait a minute, I know that guy. Small world, right? Anyway, your mom makes a killer breakfast. Tell her we left a 5-star review. I felt the air leave my lungs in a whoosh. Airbnb. It was impossible. It was insane. It was a perfect, secret, under-the-table source of income. They were crying poverty to me, taking my money for every little thing from property taxes to my brother's spending money, while simultaneously running a hotel out of my grandfather's house. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me dizzy. I immediately called my grandfather. My voice was shaking with a rage so pure it was almost calm. You need to see this. I forwarded him the screenshots of my conversation with Mark. A few minutes later, his reply came back, a single cold sentence. Find the listing. Took me less than 10 minutes. I felt like a detective on the verge of cracking a case. I went to the Airbnb website, searched for rentals in my hometown, and filtered by location. And there it was. Laura's Cozy Suburban Retreat. The cover photo was the front of my childhood home, the big oak tree in the yard perfectly framed. I clicked through the gallery. My heart hammered against my ribs. There was my old bedroom, redecorated with generic art and far too many fluffy pillows, listed as the Blue Room. There was the guest room, now pompously titled the Garden View Suite. They had even turned the finished basement, where I used to play video games, into a separate unit with its own private entrance. The host's name was Laura P. My mother's middle name is Patricia. It was a flimsy disguise, but good enough to fool strangers. And then I saw the reviews. Dozens of them stretching back over a year and a half. Laura was a wonderful host, so welcoming, and the house is beautiful. Clean, quiet, and the breakfast was amazing. We'll definitely be back. Perfect place to stay. Much better than a hotel. Laura is a gem. They had a near-perfect 5-star rating. and the calendar showed they were booked solid most weekends. A quick calculation in my head told me they weren't just making a little pocket money. They were likely pulling in over $2,000 a month, tax-free. All while crying to me that they couldn't afford to pay the water bill. All while my brother was taking my $300 a month because he was struggling. The fury that had been simmering inside me for weeks erupted into a white-hot rage. This wasn't just about being used anymore. This was a calculated, long-term fraud. They were profiting from an asset that wasn't theirs, lying to the man who had given them a place to live, and stealing from their own son to cover the legitimate costs of their secret business. The property taxes I paid were their cost of doing business. The utilities I covered were their overhead. I found it. I texted my grandfather, sending him the link. His response was immediate and chilling. Good. Now we have them. They've just handed our lawyer the final nail for their coffin. The next day, my grandfather and I paid them a surprise visit. I had my phone in my pocket recording audio. We used his old key to let ourselves in. The first thing we saw was a little chalkboard sign in the hallway with "Welcome Guests" written on it in my mother's cursive. On the coffee table in the living room was a leather-bound guest book, filled with glowing entries from people from all over the country. My mother and Ethan were in the kitchen, preparing a tray of muffins and coffee. They froze when they saw us, their faces a comical picture of horror. "Dad, Leo, what are you doing here?" My mother stammered, her face turning a pale, doughy color. My grandfather didn't answer her. He just walked over to the guest book, picked it up, and opened it. He looked up from the page, his eyes boring into them. The silence in that room was heavier than anything I had ever felt. They knew. They knew that we knew. The game was over. "I was just looking for the 5-star review from a Mark Jensen," my grandfather said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I believe he mentioned your killer breakfast, Brenda." My mother's face crumpled. Ethan just stared at the floor, his golden boy arrogance completely gone, replaced by the look of a petulant child who had just been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Their secret, profitable little world had just come crashing down. After we confronted them with the Airbnb guest book, a rational person might have apologized. They might have shown remorse or, at the very least, shame. But my family was not rational. They were cornered animals. And they did what cornered animals do. They attacked. They didn't apologize. They doubled down. They went from playing the victims to launching an all-out offensive. And their chosen battlefield was my mother's church. Brenda had always been a pillar of her church community. She was on the hospitality committee. She sang in the choir on Sundays. Everyone knew and loved the sweet, kind, ever so pious Mrs. Pierce. She leveraged that reputation to its full, devastating extent. She told everyone that her confused elderly father-in-law, under the malicious and greedy influence of his money-obsessed grandson, was trying to steal their family home. It was a brilliant, evil move. She wasn't just attacking me anymore. She was attacking my grandfather's credibility, his very sanity. It was a direct assault on his character, painting him as a senile old man being manipulated by his evil offspring. This was their new, desperate narrative, elder abuse. Friends of my grandfather, people he'd played golf with for 50 years, started calling him, their voices filled with a hesitant, awkward concern. "Arthur, are you all right? We heard a very disturbing story from Brenda at the Bible study group." This was the final straw for my grandfather. He was a man who valued his reputation and his clear mind above all else. He had built a life on integrity and facts. Being portrayed as a feeble-minded puppet was an insult he would not tolerate under any circumstances. "They've gone too far, Leo," he told me over the phone, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. It was completely devoid of emotion, which was far more terrifying than anger. "Brenda is hosting a special prayer service for the family this Sunday. She's billing it as a plea for healing. She invited the entire congregation and all of our mutual friends. She plans to put on a show. Well, she'll get one. Just not the one she's expecting." Sunday morning arrived, gray and overcast, a perfect mirror for my mood. I felt sick to my stomach as we pulled up to the church. I had to be convinced to even go. "This is a public accusation," my grandfather had insisted. "It requires a public response." My grandfather, however, was the picture of calm, righteous determination. He was dressed in his best Sunday suit, and he carried a sleek leather briefcase that looked dangerously out of place in a house of worship. We slipped into a pew at the very back just as the service was starting. I felt dozens of pairs of eyes on us, a mixture of curiosity and judgment. The whispers were almost audible. After the hymns and the sermon, the pastor, a kind-looking man named Reverend Michael, took the stage, his face etched with concern. "And now," he said, his voice soft with sympathy, "Brenda Pierce would like to say a few words and ask for our community's prayers during a difficult time for her family." My mother walked to the pulpit, dabbing her eyes with a perfectly folded tissue. She looked out at the packed pews, her face a mask of profound sorrow. Ethan and my father sat in the front row, looking appropriately somber and supportive, the perfect picture of a family under siege. "My dear friends," she began, her voice cracking with practiced emotion, "I come to you today with a heart that is completely broken. As many of you know, my family is facing a terrible, terrible trial." She went on to spin a tragic tale of a lifetime of work, of building a home, of raising 2 sons, only to have it all threatened in their golden years. She talked about the pain of being betrayed by family, carefully avoiding our names but making it perfectly clear who she meant. "And my dear father-in-law," she said, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, her eyes scanning the crowd for sympathy. "A man we all love and respect. It pains me to say that he is not himself. He is being influenced by greed and bitterness, and it is tearing our beautiful family apart." The congregation was completely captivated. People were shaking their heads in sympathy. I saw Mrs. Gable, a woman from the hospitality committee who always praised my mother's casseroles, pass her a box of tissues from the front pew. They were buying every single word of it. My mother took a shaky breath, preparing for her grand finale. "All we ask," she said, her eyes welling up with tears, her voice trembling, "is for your prayers. Pray that hearts will be softened. Pray that this darkness will be lifted from our family." It was at that moment, at the absolute peak of her performance, that my grandfather stood up. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, tall and silent, in the back of the church. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd as people turned to see who it was. My mother stopped mid-sentence, her jaw literally dropping. Her eyes widened in genuine, unscripted shock. She hadn't expected us to be there. My grandfather looked at the pastor, his expression unreadable. "Reverend," he said, his voice calm but powerful, carrying effortlessly through the silent hall. "I believe there are a few important details that have been omitted from this story. With your permission, I would like to offer some clarification." The pastor, looking completely bewildered, like a man who had lost control of his own service, could only nod. The entire church held its breath. The show was about to begin. My grandfather walked slowly and deliberately down the center aisle, his briefcase in hand. The only sound in the cavernous church was the soft, authoritative tap of his leather shoes on the stone floor. It was the sound of approaching judgment. He didn't look at my parents or Ethan, who were staring at him with a mixture of fury and panic. He walked directly to the pulpit, gave a respectful nod to the shell-shocked pastor, and turned to face the congregation. My mother was still standing there, frozen like a statue, the tissue clutched in her white-knuckled hand. "Good morning," Grandpa Arthur began, his voice steady and clear, a stark contrast to my mother's trembling performance. "My name is Arthur Pierce. For those of you who don't know me, I am Richard's father and Leo's grandfather. I have heard my daughter-in-law's plea for your prayers, and I agree, our family does need them. But not for the reasons she has so dramatically stated." He placed his briefcase on the pulpit and opened it. The sharp click of the latches echoed in the silent church like a pair of gunshots. Brenda spoke of a home they built over decades. This is a lovely sentiment. However, it is not factually accurate. He pulled out the first document, a thick sheaf of paper. This is the deed to the house on Oak Street. As you can see, the sole owner is the Pierce Family Trust, of which I am the sole trustee. I have owned this house, free and clear, for 45 years. Richard and Brenda have been living there as my guests, not as owners. A low murmur rippled through the pews, a sound like wind rustling through dry leaves. People shifted in their seats, turning to look at my father, whose face had gone from somber to a blotchy, furious red. My mom looked like she had seen a ghost. She also spoke of betrayal, Grandpa continued, his voice never wavering, his eyes scanning the crowd. Let's talk about betrayal. For the past decade, the verbal agreement was that they would cover the property's modest expenses. They failed to do so. My grandson, Leo, he gestured back to me, and I felt 100 pairs of eyes land on me. A young man just starting his career has been paying the property taxes on my house for them. He has been paying their utilities. He has been giving his brother a monthly allowance from his own salary. He has done this silently, out of a sense of duty and love he was taught in this very church. He let that sink in for a moment. He looked around the room, making eye contact with people he had known for years, people who were now looking at him with dawning understanding. This is not a story of a son abandoning his family. This is the story of a family that abandoned their son's generosity the moment it ceased to be convenient for them. Then he went for the kill. But that is not the most egregious deception. He pulled out a stack of printed papers, stapled together. For the past 18 months, while taking thousands of dollars from my grandson to cover basic living costs, my son and his family have been running an illegal, unlicensed bed and breakfast out of my property. He held up a printout of the Airbnb listing with the high-resolution picture of his house for everyone to see. They call it Laura's Cozy Suburban Retreat. They have dozens of 5-star reviews praising the wonderful host Brenda and her delicious breakfasts. They have been earning a significant, undeclared income by renting out rooms in a house they do not own, a house they claimed they couldn't afford to maintain. The silence in the church was absolute. It was the silence of pure, unadulterated shock. The narrative hadn't just been challenged. It had been utterly and completely demolished. People were staring at my parents not with sympathy, but with a mixture of comprehension and disgust. The whispers started quiet at first, then growing in volume. My grandfather picked up his papers and placed them neatly back in his briefcase. He looked directly at my mother, who was now ashen-faced. His voice was not angry. It was filled with a profound, weary sadness that was more damning than any shout. "You came here for prayers, Brenda," he said softly, "and I will pray for you. I will pray that you find the conscience you seem to have misplaced." He then turned, gave a final nod to the pastor, and walked back down the aisle, his head held high. I stood up and followed him, my legs feeling unsteady. As we walked out the heavy oak doors, not a single person said a word to us. We didn't need them to. The truth finally had spoken for itself. This was the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You are amazing. Please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, so I know you've been with me on this journey. It not only helps more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of my journey. Leaving the church felt like walking out of a pressure cooker into the clean, cool air of freedom. We didn't say anything on the drive back to my grandfather's house. We didn't have to. The public humiliation had been a necessary, brutal piece of surgery to remove a cancerous lie. The web of deceit my family had so carefully woven was now in tatters. Their last, desperate attempt to seize control of the narrative was the elder abuse claim. But after the stunt my grandfather pulled at the church, that story fell apart faster than a wet paper bag. He didn't stop there, though. My grandfather was a man who believed in being thorough. The next day, he and his lawyer, Mr. Davies, assembled what he grimly called truth packets. Each packet contained copies of the key documents: the deed to the house, a summary of the property tax payments I had made over the years, printouts of the Airbnb listing and reviews, and, as a final flourish, a notarized letter from his personal physician confirming he was of sound mind and body, and a sharp letter from his lawyer warning against any further defamatory statements regarding my grandfather's mental state or my character. He hand-delivered these packets to his closest friends, the ones my mother had tried so hard to poison against him. It was a checkmate move. There was no argument left for them to make. The fallout was swift. Aunt Carol called me, her voice dripping with an embarrassment so thick it was almost comical. "Leo," she said, sounding deeply mortified, "your grandfather stopped by. He showed me the papers. I had no idea what they did. It's just awful. I am so sorry for how I spoke to you." I accepted her apology. I knew she was just another pawn in my mother's lifelong game of chess. Uncle Robert also called, his gruff disappointment replaced by a tone of respect. "Kid, I owe you an apology. Your grandpa set me straight. I should have listened to you. What your dad did, hell, what they all did. It's not right." With their public support gone and their lies exposed, my family had no choice but to face the cold, hard reality of the law. We went to court for the eviction hearing a week later. It was a short, sterile affair held in a drab, wood-paneled room. My parents and Ethan sat on one side with a haggard-looking public defender. My grandfather and I sat on the other with the impeccably dressed and formidable Mr. Davies. They tried to argue that they had equity in the home because they had lived there for so long. Their lawyer claimed they had made significant improvements over the years. Mr. Davies calmly stood up and presented the evidence of the Airbnb business, arguing that not only had they violated their tenancy agreement by running a business out of the property, but they had also been profiting from it illegally without declaring the income. He pointed out that any improvements were likely made to increase their rental income, not to maintain the property out of a sense of familial duty. He even had a sworn affidavit from Mark Jensen. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, was not impressed with their case. She looked at my parents over the top of her reading glasses with an expression of unconcealed disdain. The verdict was decisive and brutal. The judge terminated their right to occupancy and, due to the clear evidence of fraud and bad faith, she shortened the standard eviction notice from 60 days down to just 14. 14 days to pack up a lifetime of entitlement and leave the home they never owned. The days that followed were filled with a profound and eerie quiet. The angry calls and manipulative texts stopped completely. It was as if they had ceased to exist. I drove past the house once, out of a morbid curiosity. I saw a large moving truck parked in the driveway, its ramp down like a sad, tired tongue. Boxes were stacked up on the lawn, a messy monument to a dismantled life. There was a sense of finality to it, a sad and quiet deconstruction of the world they had built on my back. On the 14th day, the day they were legally required to be out, I got a text from my grandfather. "It's done. They're gone." I called him. "Did they say anything? Did they leave a note?" "The keys were left on the kitchen counter," he replied, his voice weary, "and a pile of trash bags by the curb. They were gone before the sun came up. No goodbye. No final, angry confrontation. No tearful apologies. They just vanished into the pre-dawn darkness." It felt strangely anticlimactic. All that drama, all that fighting, and it ended with a quiet, empty house and a set of keys on a counter. That evening, my grandfather offered me the house. "It's yours if you want it, Leo. In my will, the inheritance was always going to be split, but given the circumstances, you've more than paid for it over the years." I was touched, deeply. It was an incredible gesture. But I shook my head. "No, thank you, Grandpa. There are too many ghosts in that house for me. I need a fresh start. A place that's only mine." He nodded, a look of understanding on his face. He walked over to the window in his study and looked out at the setting sun. "Now they get to live like normal people," he said, more to himself than to me. "Go to work. Pay rent. Try." The word hung in the air between us. Try. It was something they hadn't had to do in a very long time. The house was now empty. The financial ties were severed, and a new, uncertain chapter was beginning for all of us. I felt a profound sense of relief, but also a lingering sadness for the family I once thought I had. the family that had turned out to be nothing more than an illusion. The war was over, but now I had to learn how to live in the peace that followed. 6 months passed. 6 months of quiet, glorious, uninterrupted peace. It was amazing how much mental and emotional space opened up in my life when I wasn't constantly bracing for the next financial emergency or manipulative text message. My work at the software firm flourished. Freed from the constant, low-grade stress that had been my companion for years, I was more focused, more creative, more present. I spearheaded a major project that launched ahead of schedule and under budget, earning me a significant bonus and a promotion to a senior engineering position with a hefty raise. For the first time, my salary felt like my own, not a communal fund I was tasked with managing. I started investing seriously, building a real future for myself. I even bought that new laptop and a new car to go with it. I spent my weekends not worrying about them, but rediscovering myself. I went hiking with my buddy Sam, exploring trails and mountains I never had time for before. I took up cooking classes, learning how to make something other than pasta and grilled cheese. Most importantly, I had dinner with my grandfather every Sunday, a new tradition that became the anchor of my week. We talk about everything and nothing: books, politics, his sprawling garden. We never spoke about my parents or Ethan. There was an unspoken agreement that that chapter was closed, the book placed back on the shelf, never to be opened again. Of course, I was curious about what had become of them. I'm human. The news came in drips and drabs from my Uncle Robert, who had made it a point to call me once a month, as if to atone for his initial judgment. "It's rough, Leo," he told me one afternoon over the phone, his voice heavy. "It's a hard lesson for them to be learning at their age. Your dad got a part-time job at a hardware store, in the plumbing aisle. He complains about his back a lot. Your mom is a cashier at a grocery store. She hates it, says the customers are rude. They're renting a small 2-bedroom duplex on the other side of town, right by the highway. It's a big adjustment." I felt a pang of something, not guilt, not anymore. It was a strange, detached pity, the kind you might feel for a character in a book whose bad decisions have finally caught up with them. They were in their late 50s, starting over, learning the lessons most people learn in their 20s. "And Ethan?" I asked, almost dreading the answer. Uncle Robert sighed, a long, weary sound. "That kid. He's a piece of work. He tried to pull a scam on Facebook Marketplace, listing someone else's apartment for rent and trying to collect security deposits online. He got caught, of course. Caused a huge mess. I heard your dad had to borrow money from his own brother, me, to pay people back to avoid charges being filed. He's working as a delivery driver now. The irony of him finally having a job that involves a car is not lost on me. It was a sad, pathetic outcome, but it was the outcome they had built for themselves, brick by brick, lie by lie. They had spent years living in a comfortable bubble I provided, and the pinprick of reality had been a harsh wake-up call. At a family barbecue, one I now felt comfortable attending without fear of being ambushed, Aunt Julie told me that the extended family felt lied to and manipulated by my parents for years. The tide of opinion had completely and irrevocably turned. We weren't the villains anymore. We were just the ones who had finally turned on the lights in a very dark room. Then, one afternoon, after nearly a year of complete and total silence, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. It was a plain, white envelope with my name and address written on the front in my father's familiar, looping script. There was no return address. My heart hammered in my chest. I almost threw it away unopened. What could he possibly have to say to me? What manipulation, what angle was left for him to play? But curiosity, that persistent human flaw, got the better of me. I went inside, sat at my clean kitchen table, and carefully opened it with a knife. Inside was a single sheet of cheap notebook paper, the kind with the ragged edge from being torn out of a spiral. The letter was short. "Leo, I know it's been a while. I hope you are well. I have had a lot of time to think this past year, working on my feet all day. I know I was not the father I should have been. I let my pride and my laziness get in the way, and I took your support for granted. I am sorry for the pain I caused you and your grandfather. I am trying to be a better man." For a split second, a foolish, naive flicker of hope ignited in me. Was this it? A genuine apology? The beginning of a long, difficult road to reconciliation? But then I read the next paragraph, and the hope died as quickly as it had appeared. I have an opportunity, a chance to start a small landscaping business, a way to finally stand on my own 2 feet and provide for your mother properly. But the bank requires a cosigner for the startup loan, a person with good credit and a stable income. I know it is a lot to ask, more than I have a right to, but I am asking you, as my son, to consider helping me one last time. It would mean the world to us. It was all there, the performance of remorse, the appeal to my role as son, the familiar, cloying pull of obligation. It wasn't an apology. It was the preamble to an ask. It was the same old song, just with a sadder, more desperate melody. A final, desperate attempt to get his hands back into my pockets, to tie his financial fate to mine once more. Some people don't learn from their mistakes. They just get better at crafting their apologies. This was the final twist, the confirmation that their fundamental nature hadn't changed at all. They hadn't learned about responsibility. They had just learned that their old methods of extortion no longer worked. I read the letter one more time and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a quiet, profound sense of finality. The person who had written this letter was a stranger to me, a ghost from a life I no longer lived. I walked over to my kitchen shredder, the one I had bought for my home office. I fed the letter into the slot and watched as his words, his fake apology, and his final, desperate request were turned into a pile of meaningless, cross-cut strips of paper. I didn't need to reply. My silence was the only answer he would ever need. The following Sunday, I was at my grandfather's house, not for any crisis, but just to be there. We were in his garden, a place of order and life. The sun was warm on my back, and the air smelled of rich soil and blooming roses. It was peaceful. After shredding my dad's letter, a weight I didn't even know I was still carrying had finally, completely lifted. I told my grandfather about the letter, describing the feigned apology and the inevitable ask. He listened, nodding as he pruned a rose bush with the practiced, steady hands of a man who understands that sometimes, to encourage new growth, you have to cut away the dead parts. He didn't seem surprised in the slightest. Some people don't try to break your boundaries, Leo, he said, snipping off a dead branch with a satisfying click. They just pretend they were never there to begin with. To them, you will always be a resource to be tapped, not a person to be respected. He was right. For so long, I had thought that setting a boundary was a declaration of war. That saying no was an act of cruelty. I had been raised to believe that family was an unconditional bond that required unconditional sacrifice from me. But it wasn't. A true bond is a two-way street. What I had was a one-way contract, and I was the only one paying the premiums. Saying no wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. It was drawing a line in the sand and saying, my peace, my well-being, my future, they start here, and you are not welcome to cross. Do you ever miss them? I asked, the question surprising even myself as it left my lips. He stopped his work and turned to look at me, his eyes full of a weary wisdom that only comes from a long and complicated life. I miss the family I thought I had, he said, his voice soft. I miss the son I hoped my son would become. But I don't miss the constant disappointment. I don't miss the lies. Peace of mind has a cost, Leo. And as you get older, you realize it's one of the few things in this world worth paying any price for. We worked in comfortable silence for a while after that, the snip of his shears and the buzz of happy bees the only sounds. I looked around at my life, my fulfilling career, my real friendships, my quiet and peaceful apartment, my unbreakable bond with this incredible man. I hadn't lost a family. I had escaped a cage that had been disguised as a home. I had traded their conditional, transactional affection for my own unconditional self-respect. And it was, without a doubt, the best trade I had ever made. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded into a scar that no longer ached, and in its place was a quiet, steady strength. I had finally learned what I was worth. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It's a strange thing to share something so personal, but I feel like these stories are important. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you cared about? I'd be honored to read your experience in the comments below. And if you found some value in my story, please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what I share next. It really does help. Take care of yourselves.